Please excuse any mispronunciations by TTS. The English TTS has trouble with non-English words. But, if you watch Zentreya, you should be fine. As a result of YouTube's rules pertaining to links in descriptions, I will be adding site details to the video.
List of music genres and styles. This is a list of music genres and styles. Music can be described in terms of many genres and styles. Classifications are often arbitrary, and may be disputed, and closely related forms often overlap. Larger genres and styles comprise more specific subcategories. Classical music has been around for thousands of years, and has influenced every type of music that came after. Any person who claims to like music should know at the very least, Johann Sebastian Bach, Vivaldi, or Rousseau. I won't be including samples of the music in the videos, for copyright reasons. I hope you enjoy the article.
Baroque music refers to the period or dominant style of Western classical music composed from about 1600 to 1750. The Baroque style followed the Renaissance period, and was followed in turn by the Classical period after a short transition. The Baroque period is divided into three major phases: early, middle, and late. Overlapping in time, they are conventionally dated from 1580 to 1650, from 1630 to 1700, and from 1680 to 1750. Baroque music forms a major portion of the classical music canon, and is widely studied, performed, and listened to. The term Baroque comes from the Portuguese word barroco, meaning misshapen pearl. The works of Johann Sebastian Bach and Georg Friedrich Handel are considered the pinnacle of the Baroque period. Other key composers of the Baroque era include Antonio Vivaldi, Domenico Scarlatti, Claudio Monteverdi, Alessandro Scarlatti, Alessandro Stradella, Tommaso Albinoni, Johann Pachelbel, Henry Purcell, George Philippe Telemann, Jean-Baptiste Lully, Jean-Philippe Rameau, Marc-Antoine Charpentier, Arcangelo Corelli, François Couperin, Johann Hermann Schein, Heinrich Schütz, Samuel Scheidt, Dieterich Buxtehude, Gaspar Sanz, José de Nebra, Antonio Soler, Carlo Seixas, Adam Jartsevsky, Jan Dismas Zelenka, Heinrich Ignaz Franz Biber and Giovanni Battista Pergolesi. The Baroque saw the formalization of common practice tonality, an approach to writing music in which a song or piece is written in a particular key. This type of harmony has continued to be used extensively in Western classical and popular music. During the Baroque era, professional musicians were expected to be accomplished improvisers of both solo melodic lines and accompaniment parts. Baroque concerts were typically accompanied by a basso continuo group while a group of bass instruments, viol, cello, double bass, played the bass line. A characteristic Baroque form was the dance suite. While the pieces in a dance suite were inspired by actual dance music, dance suites were designed purely for listening, not for accompanying dancers. During the period, composers experimented with finding a fuller sound for each instrumental part, made changes in musical notation, and developed new instrumental playing techniques. Baroque music expanded the size, range, and complexity of instrumental performance, and also established the mixed vocal/instrumental forms of opera, cantata, and oratorio and the instrumental forms of the solo concerto and sonata as musical genres. Dense, complex polyphonic music, in which multiple independent melody lines were performed simultaneously, was an important part of many Baroque choral and instrumental works. Overall, Baroque music was a tool for expression and communication. The etymology of Baroque is probably via the French Baroque, and from the Portuguese Barroco. Also related are the Spanish Barroco and the Italian Barocco. The term is of uncertain ultimate origin, but possibly from Latin Barocca or possibly from Barocco, a technical term from scholastic logic. The term Baroque is generally used by music historians to describe a broad range of styles from a wide geographic region, mostly in Europe, composed over a period of about 150 years. Though it was long thought that the word as a critical term was first applied to architecture, in fact it appears earlier in reference to music, in an anonymous, satirical review of the premiere in October 1733 of Rameau's Hippolyte et Aricie, printed in the Mercure de France in May 1734. The critic implied that the novelty in this opera was due Baroque, complaining that the music lacked coherent melody, was filled with unremitting dissonances, constantly changed key and meter, and speedily ran through every compositional device. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was a musician and composer as well as philosopher, wrote in 1768 in the Encyclopédie Baroque music is that in which the harmony is confused and loaded with modulations and dissonances. The singing is harsh and unnatural, the intonation difficult, and the movement limited. It appears that term comes from the word barocco used by logicians. Rousseau was referring to the philosophical term barocco, in use since the 13th century to describe a type of elaborate and, for some, unnecessarily complicated academic argument. The systematic application by historians of the term Baroque to music of this period is a relatively recent development. In 1919, Kurt Sachs became the first to apply the 5 characteristics of Heinrich Wülflin's theory of the Baroque systematically to music. Critics were quick to question the attempt to transpose Wülflin's categories to music, however, and in the second quarter of the 20th century independent attempts were made by Manfred Buchhofzer and by Suzanne Clercq-Lejeune to use autonomous, technical analysis rather than comparative abstractions in order to avoid the adaptation of theories based on the plastic arts and literature to music. All of these efforts resulted in appreciable disagreement about time boundaries of the period, especially concerning when it began. In English the term acquired currency only in the 1940s, in the writings of Buchhofzer and Paul Henry Lang. As late as 1960, there was still considerable dispute in academic circles, particularly in France and Britain, whether it was meaningful to lump together music as diverse as that of Jacopo Peri, Domenico Scarlatti, and Johann Sebastian Bach under a single rubric. Nevertheless, the term has become widely used and accepted for this broad range of music. It may be helpful to distinguish the Baroque from both the preceding and following periods of musical history. Throughout the Baroque era, new developments in music originated in Italy, after which it took up to 20 years before they were broadly adopted in rest of the Western classical music practice. For instance, Italian composers switched to the Galant style around 1730, while German composers such as Johann Sebastian Bach largely continued to write in the Baroque style up to 1750. Phases of Baroque music. Early Baroque. Gabrieli. Monteverdi. Frescobaldi. M. Pretorius. Sweelinck. O. Gibbons. Schütz. Middle Baroque. Cavalli. Carissimi. Legrenze. Lully. Biber. Buxtehude. Purcell. Pachelbel. Late Baroque. Corelli. Vivaldi. Pergolesi. Telemann. Rameau. Handel. J. S. Bach. The Florentine Camerata was a group of humanists, musicians, poets, and intellectuals in late Renaissance Florence who gathered under the patronage of Count Giovanni da Bardi to discuss and guide trends in the arts, especially music and drama. In reference to music, they based their ideals on a perception of classical musical drama that valued discourse and oration. Accordingly, they rejected their contemporaries' use of polyphony and instrumental music, and discussed such ancient Greek music devices as monoe, which consisted of a solo singing accompanied by a kithara. The early realizations of these ideas, including Jacopo Peri's Daphne and El Eurydice, marked the beginning of opera, which was a catalyst for Baroque music. Concerning music theory, the more widespread use of figured bass represents the developing importance of harmony as the linear underpinnings of polyphony. Harmony is the result of counterpoint, and figured bass is a visual representation of those harmonies commonly employed in musical performance. With figured bass, numbers, accidentals or symbols were placed above the bass line that was read by keyboard instrument players such as harpsichord players or pipe organists. The numbers, accidentals or symbols indicated to the keyboard player what intervals are to be played above each bass note. The keyboard player would improvise a chord voicing for each bass note. Composers began concerning themselves with harmonic progressions, and also employed the tritone, perceived as an unstable interval, to create dissonance. An interest in harmony had also existed among certain composers in the Renaissance, notably Carlo Gesualdo. However, the use of harmony directed towards tonality, rather than modality, marks the shift from the Renaissance into the Baroque period. This led to the idea that certain sequences of chords, rather than just notes, could provide a sense of closure at the end of a piece. One of the fundamental ideas that became known as tonality. By incorporating these new aspects of composition, Claudio Monteverdi furthered the transition from the Renaissance style of music to that of the Baroque period. He developed two individual styles of composition: the heritage of Renaissance polyphony and the new basso continuo technique of the Baroque. With basso continuo, a small group of musicians would play the bass line and the chords which formed the accompaniment for a melody. The basso continuo group would typically use one or more keyboard players and a lute player who would play the bass line and improvise the chords, and several bass instruments which would play the bass line. With the writing of the operas El Orfeo and L'Incarnazione di Poppea among others, Monteverdi brought considerable attention to this new genre. This Venetian style was taken handily to Germany by Heinrich Schütz, whose diverse style also evolved into the subsequent period. Idiomatic instrumental textures became increasingly prominent. In particular, the style Luthi. The irregular and unpredictable breaking up of chordal progressions, in contrast to the regular patterning of broken chords. Referred to since the early 20th century as style brise, was established as a consistent texture in French music by Robert Ballard, in his lute books of 1611 and 1614, and by Ennemond Gaultier. This idiomatic lute figuration was later transferred to the harpsichord. He completed 15 lyric tragedies and left unfinished Achille et Polixene. Lully was an early example of a conductor. He would beat the time with a large staff to keep his ensembles together. Musically, he did not establish the string-dominated norm for orchestras, which was inherited from the Italian opera, and the characteristically French five-part disposition had been used in the ballet from the time of Louis XIII. He did, however, introduce this ensemble to the lyric theatre, with the upper parts often doubled by recorders, flutes, and oboes, and the bass by bassoons. Trumpets and kettledrums were frequently added for heroic scenes. The Middle Baroque period in Italy is defined by the emergence of the vocal styles of cantata, oratorio, and opera during the 1630s, and a new concept of melody and harmony that elevated the status of the music to one of equality with the words, which formerly had been regarded as preeminent. The florid coloratura monoi of the early Baroque gave way to a simpler, more polished melodic style. These melodies were built from short, cadentially delimited ideas often based on stylized dance patterns drawn from the saraband or the couranti. The harmonies, too, might be simpler than in the early Baroque monoi, to show expression in a lighter manner on the string and crescendos and diminuendos on longer notes. The accompanying bass lines were more integrated with the melody, producing a contrapuntal equivalence of the parts that later led to the device of an initial bass anticipation of the aria melody. This harmonic simplification also led to a new formal device of the differentiation of recitative and aria. The most important innovators of this style were the Romans Luigi Rossi and Giacomo Carissimi, who were primarily composers of cantatas and oratorios, respectively, and the Venetian Francesco Cavalli, who was principally an opera composer. Later important practitioners of this style include Antonio Sesti, Giovanni Legrenzi, and Alessandro Stradella, who additionally originated the concerto grosso style in his Sonate di Violi. Arcangelo Corelli is remembered as influential for his achievements on the other side of musical technique. As a violinist who organized violin technique and pedagogy. And in purely instrumental music, particularly his advocacy and development of the concerto grosso. Whereas Lully was ensconced at court, Corelli was one of the first composers to publish widely and have his music performed all over Europe. As with Lully's stylization and organization of the opera, the concerto grosso is built on strong contrasts. Sections alternate between those played by the full orchestra, and those played by a smaller group. Fast sections and slow sections were juxtaposed against each other. Numbered among his students is Antonio Vivaldi, who later composed hundreds of works based on the principles in Corelli's trio sonatas and concerti. In contrast to these composers, Dieterich Buxtehude was not a creature of court but instead was church musician, holding the posts of organist and workmeister at the Marienkirche at Lübeck. His duties as workmeister involved acting as the secretary, treasurer, and business manager of the church, while his position as organist included playing for all the main services, sometimes in collaboration with other instrumentalists or vocalists, who were also paid by the church. Entirely outside of his official church duties, he organized and directed a concert series known as the Abendmusiken, which included performances of sacred dramatic works regarded by his contemporaries as the equivalent of operas. France. Denis Gaultier, Jean-Henri d'Anglebert, Jacques Champion de Chambonnières, Louis Couperat. Late Baroque music. The work of George Frideric Handel, Johann Sebastian Bach and their contemporaries, including Domenico Scarlatti, Antonio Vivaldi, Tommaso Albinoni, Jean-Philippe Rameau, Georges-Philippe Telemann, and others advanced the Baroque era to its climax, the High Baroque. Onset. Italy. Alessandro Scarlatti. Neapolitan School, Neapolitan Mass. Arcangelo Corelli. Trio Sonata, Concerto Grosso, La Folia. Giuseppe Torelli. Solo Concerto. A characteristic of the Baroque form was the dance suite. Some dance suites by Bach are called partitas, although this term is also used for other collections of pieces. While the pieces in a dance suite were inspired by actual dance music, dance suites were intended for listening, not for accompanying dancers. Composers used a variety of different movements in their dance suites. A dance suite commonly has these movements. Overture. The Baroque suite often began with a French overture, a slow movement followed by a succession of principally 4 different types of dances. Allemande, often the first dance of an instrumental suite. The Allemande was a very popular dance that had its origins in the German Renaissance era. The Allemande was played at a moderate tempo and could start on any beat of the bar. Couranti. The second dance is the couranti, in triple meter. It can be either fast and lively or slow and stately. The Italian version is called the currenti. Sarabande. The sarabande, a Spanish dance, is the third of the 4 basic dances, and is one of the slowest of the Baroque dances. It is also in triple meter and can start on any beat of the bar, although there is an emphasis on the second beat, creating the characteristic halting, or iambic rhythm of the sarabande. Gigue. The gigue is an upbeat and lively Baroque dance in compound meter, typically the concluding movement of an instrumental suite, and the 4th of its basic dance types. The gigue can start on any beat of the bar and is easily recognized by its rhythmic feel. The gigue originated in the British Isles. Its counterpart in folk music is the jig. The 4 dance types Allemande, couranti, sarabande, and gigue make up the majority of 17th century suites. Later suites interpolate 1 or more additional dances between the sarabande and gigue. Gavotte. The gavotte is in duple meter, with phrases which start on an offbeat. The gavotte is played at a moderate tempo, although those in an Italian style may be faster. Bourrée. The bourrée is similar to the gavotte as it is in 2/2 time, although it starts on the second half of the last beat of the bar, creating a different feel to the dance. The bourrée is commonly played at a moderate tempo, although for some composers, such as Handel, it can be taken at a much faster tempo. Minuet. In triple meter at moderate tempo. It does not have an anacrusis. The Italian minuet was typically faster, with longer phrases. Passapede. The passapede is a fast dance in binary form and triple meter that originated as a court dance in Brittany. Rigaudon. The rigaudon is a lively French dance in duple meter, similar to the bourrée, but rhythmically simpler. It originated as a family of closely related southern French folk dances, traditionally associated with the provinces of Bavarise, Languedoc, Dauphine, and Provence. There are many other dance forms as well as other pieces that could be included in a suite, such as polonaise, lauer, scherzo, air, etc. Other features. Prelude. A suite might be started by a prelude, a slow piece written in an improvisatory style. Some Baroque preludes were not fully written out, instead, a sequence of chords were indicated, with the expectation that the instrumentalist would be able to improvise a melodic part using the indicated harmonic framework. The prelude was not based on a type of dance. Entrée. Sometimes an entrée is composed as part of a suite, but there it is purely instrumental music and no dance is performed. It is an introduction, a march-like piece played during the entrance of a dancing group, or played before a ballet. Usually in 4/4 time. It is related to the Italian intrada. Basso continuo. A kind of continuous accompaniment notated with a new music notation system, figured bass, usually for one or more sustaining bass instruments cello and one or more chord-playing instruments keyboard instruments such as harpsichord, pipe organ, or lute. The concerto. A solo piece with orchestral accompaniment and concerto grosso. Monoi. An accompanied Italian solo song, an outgrowth of arrangements of ensemble music for solo instruments in the late 16th century. Homophony. Music with one melodic voice and rhythmically similar chordal accompaniment, this and monoi are contrasted with the typical Renaissance texture, polyphony. Dramatic musical forms like opera, drama per musica. Combined instrumental vocal forms such as the oratorio and cantata, both of which used singers and orchestra. New instrumental techniques like tremolo and pizzicato. The da capo aria had become the dominant form of aria by 1680. The ritornello aria repeated short instrumental interruptions of vocal passages. The concertato style contrast in sound between groups of instruments. Extensive ornamentation, which was typically improvised by singers and instrumentalists.